This video is going to talk about absolute value. But before we start to talk about absolute value, we're going to do a quick review of something that we talked about yesterday, which is opposites. So, if we're looking at the opposite of negative 12, what we first have to do is we have to take a look at negative 12 and find where it is on the number line and figure out it's right there, right? How many steps is negative 12 from 0? Well, we could go and we could count 1, 2, 3, 4, but we know it's going to be 12 because it's negative 12. So you would take 12 steps to get to 0. So the opposite of taking 12 steps this way would be 12 steps this way, would be over here. You're still taking 12 steps, right? You're just taking 12 steps in the opposite direction. So the opposite of negative 12 is going to be positive 12. Let's take a look at the opposite of 8. We find 8 on the number line, and we know that it's 8 steps away from 0. Now we need to start at 0 and take 8 steps in the opposite direction. And taking 8 steps in the opposite direction will get me to negative 8. So the opposite of 8 is negative 8. Another way to think about opposites is just to flip the sign. Negative to positive, positive to negative. That's really the only way you have to think about it. To talk about absolute value is the distance between a number and 0 on the number line. So, the absolute value of negative 12. Let's take a look at that. First, you need to know what the absolute value sign is. And it's 2 bars up and down surrounding a number. So it looks like that. Opposite of negative 12, the absolute value of negative 12 is going to be just 12. You're literally going to think about your arms as the absolute value signs, and then what's going to happen is you are going to clap your arms together, and that's going to erase any integer sign on there. So the absolute value of 12 when you do the clap is going to be 12. Now the absolute value of 12 without any sign is just going to be 12. The absolute value of positive 12 is the same thing. Your answer is just going to be 12. So when we look at the absolute value of 8, that will become 8. When you look at the absolute value of negative 8, when you do that, that negative sign disappears and it becomes just 8. So let's take a look at this a little bit more in depth. Let's take a look at the absolute value of 5. What absolute value is really doing is it's not measuring the direction that you're going, it's just measuring the distance. So if we go from negative 5 and we have to get to 0, we're going to measure the steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the absolute value of 5 is just going to be 5 because it's 5 steps to get from negative 5 to 0. Doesn't matter which direction you're going. If I ask you how far is it from your house to the store, and you tell me, oh, well, it's 3 miles from my house to the store, and I say, okay, how far is it from the store to your house? You're still going to tell me 3 miles because it's not negative 3 miles to get from the store to your house. It's just a flat 3 miles. And that's why we take the sign off when we're talking about absolute value. We're just talking about the distance, not the direction. So let's take a look at the absolute value of 3. We're going to start at 3, and to get to 0, that's going to take 3 steps. So the absolute value of 3 is going to be 3. Just looking at the distance, not the direction. So let's take a look at this in a little bit more of a complex situation. What if I have the absolute value of 11 minus the absolute value of negative 9. Now, the first thing I want to do with this is I want to work with these absolute value signs. So I want to get those absolute value signs out of the equation. So what is the absolute value of 11? It's going to be 11. And what is the absolute value of negative 9? Just going to be 9. The subtraction sign stays right there. So now I have 11 minus 9. And I can do 11 minus 9. 11 minus 9 is just 2. So the absolute value of 11 minus the absolute value of negative 9 is just 2. Let's put this in a little bit of context. Let's say that Katie has negative 10 points in a video game that she's playing. Her friend has 12 points. We want to know what the difference is between Katie's score and her friend's score. Well, when we look at this on a number line, and I'm not going to draw the whole thing, but we have 0 somewhere in the middle of there. We've got Katie down here at negative 10, and we've got her friend up here at 12. And we want to know the difference between Katie's score and her friend's score. So we want to know the difference from negative 10 to 0 and from 0 to 12. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the absolute value of negative 10, because that'll tell me how many steps from negative 10 to 0, plus the absolute value of 12, because I also want to know the difference from 0 to 12. So the first thing I need to do is I need to get rid of those absolute value signs. The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. The absolute value of 12 is 12. So now I have 10 plus 12, and 10 plus 12 is 22. That's a 12. We want a 22. So the answer is going to be 22 points. What you're going to do is you're going to tell me the opposite of negative 76, the opposite of 144, and the absolute value of 9 plus the absolute value of 3.